First, I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity, and I'm not going to put more time in introduction. I'll go directly on the geospatial technology for the biodiversity research and conservation. The major outline of this presentation has the different components and levels of biodiversity, and the concept of the essential biodiversity variables, and the various methods which are addressing the assessment and monitoring of the biodiversity, and the main potential applications of the remote sensing in the area of the biodiversity research and conservation, and the directions and the challenges in the field of biodiversity research through remote sensing. All we are aware that the Earth is a complex system of many systems, and here the Earth is having a biosphere. It is representing the life in lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. And here again the biodiversity is not like a just of species richness. It is a complex subject, and as defined by the Convention on Biological Diversity, the biodiversity means the variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. So it includes the diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. And there is a concept called the hierarchy concept in the biodiversity. There, the researchers have identified the various levels, like top to bottom, address the biodiversity. The topmost level, the biosphere, is representing the totality of the biodiversity. But for the understanding and monitoring and measurement of the biodiversity, the basic units at the top level are the biomes, and they are mainly based on the climatic and the other related information. And again, you have the landscapes. They are the mosaic of the various or interacting ecosystems. Again, further, you have ecosystems in the middle level. It is a mosaic of the various communities, both plant as well as the animal. And again, further towards the bottom level, we have the species populations and organisms. So the hierarchy concept of ecological organization suggests that we need to address the compositional diversity, structural diversity, and functional diversity at each of these levels. So to adequately describe this kind of system, we need to have the biodiversity metrics. So towards this, the scientists have identified the concept of essential biodiversity variable. This concept is a novel introduced by the H.M. Periyar et al., which was published in Science in the year 2013. There, the concept is in the similar lines of the essential climate variables. Here, the group is having the cross-disciplinary people in this expert group, which was with the support of the Convention on Biological Diversity, has made a document on the essential biodiversity variables. So it is having the expertise from the remote sensing scientist, space agency engineer, ecologists, and the science policy expert. They have identified the 6 essential biodiversity variable classes based on the relevance, feasibility, and accuracy and maturity of the remote sensing based technology. And the classes identified are 6, like you have the genetic composition, species populations, species traits, community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function. Among these 6 classes, the genetic composition is not possible through the remote sensing based observations, whereas with reference to the species populations and traits also, the remote sensing is contributing partially. However, it is providing the more comprehensive data for the community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function through the multi-sensor remote sensing data. And the methods. Initially, we have like field-based methods. They will give more fine-scaled or detailed information on like the species richness, species diversity, species traits, populations, actual biomass, and the economical importance of the species. The studies through the taxonomical works, we will have the detailed information on flora and fauna. And further, the ethnobotanical knowledge base also going to contribute much in the field of this biodiversity. Whereas the remote sensing, it is the indirect information through the aircrafts or satellites, and nowadays even we have drones to get the near surface information in a very high resolution scale. And the mainly with reference to the essential biodiversity variables, the remote sensing has proven its capability to address the community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function. Then in this area of the geospatial technology, we have the GIS. It is Geographic Information System, and it is a computer-aided technology. It supports the data both from satellite-based remote sensing and also from the field-based inventories. It integrates the information, and it will help us in addressing the habitat or the landscape characteristics, and we can able to understand the patterns in the data, like the data gaps, and also we can able to identify the spatial as well as the temporal patterns by linking the data from the field measurements and also through the multi-sensor remote sensing data. And the long-term data sets from remote sensing and with the integration in GIS helps us in identifying or predicting the trends in forest cover or forest types, and also the impact of the climate change on biodiversity. And we also have the habitat suitability modeling techniques that will again integrates the field derived information of species locations and the remote sensing based information of the climate variables and the vegetation metrics. Again, for the space level to the citizen level, the web-based information system help us in identifying the distribution pattern of species and also to get the location specific information and also the habitat status through the information. Then the policy level, this data which was derived through helps the policymakers and policy supporters to make a proper conservation action plans and the strategies. And now, as this is a information technology period, now there is more analytical tools are available that will help us in not only to fulfill the requirements of current day, and also it will provide the futuristic data to go for a long-term conservation and action plans. And what is the remote sensing data? The remote sensing here, whatever the information is getting is without any physical contact. The satellites, in the sense here I am showing the multispectral images, and these satellites like IRS, MODIS, or Cartosat and Sentinel, they are situated more than 500 kilometers from the Earth's surface, and they are detecting the information and identifying the surface features through the multispectral capability. And through this technology, we can able to map land use and land cover. We can able to make an information on the phenological metrics like the length of growing season, leaf onset, leaf offset, and also the peak green season period. Then we can also make the information on cumulative greenness in the given time period, seasonality, and the several information databases systems like the addressing the habitat or the vegetation health, and also in identifying the high biomass regions and also high biodiversity areas. The technology provides the data at multiple resolutions, like MODIS provides the coarse resolution data, which will be suffice the purpose of like land cover mapping and the vegetation type analysis. But further, if our interest is towards the discrimination of tree species and also the different community assemblages, we need to utilize the high spatial resolution and hyperspectral images. So this kind of data is in now majority of the cases available in open access for free download. So one can make use of these databases to understand the vegetation patterns and also the various conservation aspects. Here, I would like to highlight one of the major application of the remote sensing, that is the forest cover mapping and the change assessment. Here, I am showing the different image chips derived through the different sensor, like the 1975 image, 1995 image, and 2020. Here, I am showing the satellite imageries in false color composite. The false color composite means the vegetation appears in a red color. And here, if you compare the 1975 versus 1995 and then 2020, you have, there is tremendous change in the identified circles. Those areas are clearly depicting there is a change in the spectral response of the pixel. So pixel means it's a picture element like our photographs. So here, this change in spectral response of the pixel, once you are comparing from year to year or at the decadal scale, it is very much clear that there was a large amount of deforestation has happened in the given images and the study sites. Similarly, I have shown, like for the part of Sonitpur district in Assam, like 1975 versus 2013, there was a large scale deforestation. Again in 1975 and 2013 time period, if you see for Navranpur district in Odisha, then for the North Andaman area for 1975 to 2013. So the satellite imageries provides an evidence and also a quantifiable estimate to identify the change areas. And based on the historical databases available from like Landsat of 1970s to the recent Indian remote sensing satellites, we have generated the forest cover database for the entire country. And for the 1930s, we don't have the satellite-based remote sensing, so we have utilized the topographical maps to map the forest cover. So this will help us in identifying the areas of no change, positive change, and negative change that helps the state forest departments to make a precise and the efficient conservation as well as the management programs. And in NRSC Bhuvan web portal, we have uploaded the data of the fractional forest cover of 1930, 1975, and 2013. So whoever interested, they can make use of this data to understand the and to assess and monitor the changes happened with reference to the forest cover in their own areas. And this is the map, shows the long-term forest cover changes in India as well as in the neighboring South Asian countries. And this map clearly shows the areas of loss and also the gain and also no change. The no change areas are mostly found in the Bhutan, Arunachal Pradesh, Afghanistan, and parts of the Western Ghats and the Sri Lanka. Then if you see towards the loss, there was a major deforestation was happened in West Coast, Western Ghats, Central India, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and towards this Himalayan region, we have more deforestation in Nepal as compared with the Bhutan and the Afghanistan. And again, there was a large scale deforestation in Bangladesh. This study has quantified the loss of forest cover for the last 8 decades, and it has given information that India had lost around 28% of forest cover in the last 8 decades. And similarly, if you see for like the Bangladesh, there was a loss of around 39.1% of forest cover. Then Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, as well as the Nepal. There was least deforestation in Bhutan. It is only 2.6% of forest cover loss in the last 8 decades, and again followed by the Afghanistan. It had shown around 7.6% of forest area loss. And also to meet this global conservation targets, like we are aware that the Aichi International Biodiversity Targets, there each country has a mandate to reduce the loss of forest area. So this graph clearly shows that the annual rate of deforestation based on the decadal satellite data. And if you see this graph, like from 1930 to 1975, the majority forest cover loss of more than 0.6% per year. Again here, the Bhutan and Afghanistan are having least deforestation rate, even in the first time phase of 1930 to 1975. Then if you compare, because the CBD has in the force after 1993, and the India is also signatory of the Convention on Biological Diversity. There, if you see this 1995 to the recent period, there is a declining trend of the rate of deforestation in India, and also in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal, as well as the Bhutan. The only two countries which are showing again the increasing trend of deforestation in the recent period are the Myanmar and Bangladesh. So this kind of assessment helps the global commitments and to also identify the conservation gaps to implement the conservation policies and the action plans in a very strict mode. The another important aspect of the biodiversity research is understanding of the habitat fragmentation. Here I am showing the fragmentation levels for the forest. As the ecologist and the biologists, we are aware that the fragmentation creates the edge effects. It is responsible for the patch reduction, patch isolation, and finally, it also contributes to the loss of the native biodiversity. And the majority of the native species which can't able to accommodate with the rapid changes which are happening in the edge of the forests, so they are prone to the extinction. Similarly, like the forest fires and the invasive alien species, these two are the major environmental issues. They are also mostly affects the edge forest areas and also leads to the loss of the indigenous biodiversity. And this is the state of art capability through remote sensing, that we can able to make a spatial data on the distribution of the forest fragmentation. This map shows the forest fragmentation for the South Asian region, and it clearly identifies that there was a major or high fragmentation in the northern Western Ghats, also in the central India, and also parts of Northeast India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and the Nepal. The majority of the least fragmented or well-conserved forests are found in the central Western Ghats and the southern Western Ghats. And if you see this slide in the right frame, it was captured from the Google high-resolution imagery. So you can able to see that at the local scale, how the forest was distributed and the spatial configuration of the forest. So like now the patch forest means it has no connectivity with the remaining large forest. It became disconnected, maybe due to the encroachments, or maybe for shifting cultivation, or due to the developmental activities. The available and the very interior forest is the core forest, that is highly required for the long-term conservation of the biodiversity. So this kind of the spatial data sets and maps helps us in identifying the areas of high fragmentation and the low fragmentation. And these maps also helps us in, especially in the context of the wildlife management, we can able to build the ecological corridors, and also we can make use of these databases for the ecosystem restoration activities. The another important application of remote sensing is that we can able to make and generate the data on the distribution of the forest types. The India is a mega biodiversity country. We have a different climatic zones like tropical, subtropical, temperate, and alpine. So that also we can able to generate the data by utilizing the remote sensing. And again, the basic properties of these forest types are that the physiognomy, structure, phenology, and floristics. So based on the multi-sensor data, we can able to identify this kind of variability in a given vegetation types, and those ecological principles of structure, composition, phenology, and the physiognomy, which is available from the remote sensing, is one of the added advantage in identifying the precise distribution of these forest types. Like if you see like Vegetarian forest, this is phenologically green, and it will have the multi-storied vegetation and mostly distributed in high rainfall areas and high elevation areas. So by integrating the data from the remote sensing, we can able to identify a Vegetarian forest. Similarly, the semi-evergreen, moist deciduous, dry deciduous, littoral and swamp, dry evergreen, thorn, and the mountain vegetation types are unique, and which will be discriminated through remote sensing based imageries. Like in the most of the forests towards the high elevation Himalayas, or you have the needle-leaf forest, and towards the foothills we have the broadleaf forest. So the difference of the like leaf longevity, leaf type, and type of the structure, as well as the habitat conditions, which are the major key attributes, help us in discrimination of these forest types. So based on the data available from the multi-source remote sensing and the field information, we have developed a map of the forest types of India. So if you see here, this map clearly shows that in India, the tropical dry deciduous and the tropical moist deciduous are the predominant forest types and occupy more than 80% of the forest cover. And whereas like with the Vegetarian forest is mostly found in Western Ghats, Northeast India, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And actually it covers only less than 2% of the forest cover of India, but represents more than 70% of the endemic plant species. So this kind of spatially available information is useful in identifying and also monitoring of the changes which are happening in the Vegetarian forest and also in the nearby land cover. And in this map, I'm also showing the other land cover and land use. Like the India is having the more than 50% of area is under agricultural land. And also this map clearly shows the settlements, water bodies, snow cover, etc. So this is the one of the unique kind of database helpful for the planners to go for a management plans. And very recently, in 2021, the Potapov et al. They came up with a new map of the global forest canopy height. This is the map they have derived from the spaceborne LiDAR instrument, which is operated at International Space Station, and it is available from April 2019. And the recent publication, which is available in remote sensing environment, it is also provided the open access data for the download. So they have prepared the forest canopy height map at 30-meter resolution. So whoever is interested, they can make use of this type of the forest canopy height map. It means the stand tree height map, which will be one of the important factor in identifying and also in addressing the structural complexity and also the height variation in the vegetation of a given area. And the another important aspect of the remote sensing is the addressing the different kinds of the disasters. With reference to the vegetation, the forest fires were identified as one of the significant contributor towards the loss of biodiversity, and also it is one of the contributor for the global climate change due to the high amount of the carbon emissions. And at NRSC, we are providing this kind of a near real-time data of the active fire locations to the Forest Survey of India. And again, FSI is forwarding this database to the different state forest departments to control the forest fires. So the data is available from mostly from the MODIS, then again from the SUOME, NPP, VIRS. That will helps the state forest departments to control and to stop the fire progression. This kind of database is also useful for the research and development, and it will help us in identifying the fire risk areas based on the historical data, which is available from the MODIS 2002 to till date on a daily basis. And also we can able to identify the areas of high risk, low risk, and the moderate risk based on the information which was available through remote sensing. And this database is also useful for the biologists to address the ecological damage and also to understand the impact of fires on vegetation and the species distribution. This is again one map shows the distribution of the forest burnt area in India. By utilizing the Indian remote sensing AVFS imagery, we have assessed and mapped the forest fire affected areas in the country. And this map shows the districts which are having the large amount of the forest burnt area. That was like the districts which are affected by more than 1,000 square kilometer are 11 districts. They are mostly found in Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Odisha. And again, comparison to the number of districts, maximum districts are affected by the forest fires. And at the state level, the Odisha was affected by the highest amount of the fire affected area, followed by Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, Tamil Nadu, and Madhya Pradesh. Overall, this work has reported around 6-7% of the forest area got affected by fires during the year 2014. And by utilizing the high temporal remote sensing data of MODIS, this map clearly shows the forest fire frequency, and this information was prepared at 5 kilometer grid level in identifying the regions which are having high fire frequency, moderate fire frequency, and the low fire frequency. And if you see here again, the map clearly identifies that the areas in Northeast India, Central India, and Eastern Ghats, and parts of Rajasthan, as well as towards Maharashtra, you have the areas which are shown high fire frequency. And this graph clearly shows that the number of active fire detections for the different countries as well as for India. And for India, if you see that at an annual scale, the number of fire locations, are mainly these active fire locations reported by MODIS sensors for India, are more than 25,000 per year. So it is very clear that the fires are happening and every year, but the areas may differ spatially as well as the temporally. And using this, the GIS-based modeling techniques and by implementation of the advanced spatial statistics, we can able to identify the clusters or the hotspots of the vegetation fires. So here the map shows the hotspots of fires from 2003 to 2018, and using the emerging hotspot technique, that is a space-time pattern mining technique, which helps us in identifying the trends in fire hotspots. So the map in the right side clearly identifies the persistent hotspots, mostly in Punjab and Haryana, and Myanmar. It means this from 2003 to 2018, those areas are almost showing a regular recurrence of the fire locations. And there are, in some of the places, there are intensifying hotspots, mostly in the parts of Northeast India, like Meghalaya, Nagaland, and Mizoram. So it means the number of fire incidents are increasing the year by year in a given region. Then again, if you see towards this Western Ghats, the majority of the hotspots are the sporadic hotspots. It means these are not like a persistent or intensifying hotspots. They are on and off. It means if for 1 year or 2 years they are representing like a hotspot, but in some of the years these areas have no any kind of fire disturbance. Then coming towards the addressing of the biodiversity at different scales. Specifically in the field of the ecology and biodiversity, the species is one of the important unit considered for the assessment and the monitoring. And here we have the 3 types of the biodiversity. One is the alpha diversity. It is mostly indicates the information of the species richness of a given community. So we can say it as a community diversity. Another is the beta diversity. It is the dissimilarity between the 2 communities. Like you have in this photograph, you have the diversity of the grasslands, shrublands, and coniferous forest. So that is, this will give a it will compare like similarity as well as the dissimilarity between the given community. Then the gamma diversity is also known as the landscape diversity. It integrates the information of both alpha diversity and beta diversity. And then what are the ways to measure a biodiversity? In the case of plants, the 1 meter plot size is convenient and suitable for the grasslands and also for the herbaceous vegetation. But once you are coming towards the woody vegetation and towards the forest ecosystems, the diversity is very high, and the plot size of 1 meter or 5 meter or 10 by 10 meter may not be sufficient. So in this slide, I am showing the importance of the large plot like 1 hectare, and again here I shown the subplots of 20 by 20 meter in a 1 hectare area. So this is representing 25 subplots within a given place, and it will clearly enforce that some of the areas are having high diversity and some of the areas are having a low diversity. Similarly, there will be a difference of the biomass also. Now, if you take up like the small plots like 10 by 10 meter, 20 by 20 meter, or in 0.1 hectare in a random way, so such type of assessment may not be comprehensive and may not be covering all the floristic elements as well as the structural variation of the vegetation. So in this regard, now the experts at the global level, like the Center for Tropical Forest Science and also from the Amazon Forest Inventory, are now recommending to go for a large plots at least of 1 hectare and above. So this is a clear example that by having the small plots, we are not addressing the different types of species and also not addressing the structural, compositional, and the functional aspects of the biodiversity. Then the use of the remote sensing. And 200 spectral bands. There we have the strength of each spectral band, which will be providing the very high level of information that will be useful in the discrimination of the species and also in addressing the assessment of the diversity. Like in our field studies, we will generally do like the plots like 20 by 20 meter or 0.1 hectare or 1 hectare, but those are only useful at the plot scale. Now if you want to upscale from the plot level to the regional level, so that such type of data may not be providing a reliable result. There will be a lot of uncertainty once you upscale this kind of the plot level data to the regional level. So, but once you implement the same principle on the hyperspectral imagery, and also by integrating the field measurements, you can able to make a map of the community diversity for the entire region. So here, basically the field plots are useful like a training sets, and here again, whatever the data which is coming from the actual field work or the biological species, and now they are translating towards the hyperspectral imageries in identifying the spectral variations. So here the species are the not actual species, they are the spectral species. So by implementing the various kinds of the image processing algorithms, and by implementing the equations like the Shannon-Wave index for the high resolution and hyperspectral images, we can able to compute the species diversity or the Shannon-Wave index of a given place. So finally, that will help us in identifying the biodiversity distribution, like high diversity areas to the low diversity areas, and helpful to the forest departments in identifying the areas of high biodiversity. Very recently, the researchers from NASA as well as from the other countries have given the highest emphasis on the indices. They are known as the dynamic habitat indices. Basically, the dynamic habitat indices covers the three components of the productivity. One is that cumulative greenness. Here we are making use of the high temporal remote sensing data, and it will accumulate all the greenness of the on daily basis. So we can able to identify areas which are having high amount of greenness in the given annual period. Then the second index is known as the minimum annual green cover. This will help us in identifying the areas which are maintaining at least some amount of the green cover throughout the period. So this kind of database is useful to the wildlife management also, because the lot of the herbivores which are in the wilderness zones or in the forest ecosystems, they are depending on the grasslands and fodder. So this kind of map helpful to the management in identifying the areas which are maintaining at least the minimum amount of green cover throughout the period. Then the seasonality, this is based on the coefficient of variation. So that will provide us the areas which are having high seasonality in a given place. This is the Similipal Wildlife Sanctuary in Odisha. And actually this concept is a proxy for the available species energy hypothesis, environmental stress hypothesis, and environmental stability hypothesis. The researchers have utilized this dynamic habitat indices in addressing the species richness. For example, like the areas which are having high cumulative greenness, like the shola forest or vetiver rainforest, generally they have high amount of the green material throughout the year. So this is a proxy in identifying the high species richness areas. Similarly, and also in addressing the habitat conditions, like the increasing trend of green cover or decreasing trend of green cover and other climate induced or anthropogenic induced changes also, we can able to develop and identify by having this kind of databases. And these dynamic habitat indices we can generate at annual scale to the decadal scale, and we can able to identify areas which are showing the negative trend and a positive trend. Towards the remote sensing of animals, the technology was not matured like in the case of the plants or the vegetation. However, there are few studies which were utilized the very high resolution images in studying the birds populations and their distribution. This is one of the Google Earth high resolution imagery for October 2010. It clearly shows the white dots, they are the flamingo, and there is one white patch in this imagery, that is a flamingo city, one of the hotspot of the flamingos in the Ran of Kutch in Gujarat. So this patch is completely filled with the high number of the lakhs of flamingos, and which were visited in the October. And this type of database also useful in identifying and studying the migration patterns of the birds, and also to identify the congregations as well as the habitat conditions of the birds as well as the other species. And recently, there is a publication that the researchers, mainly the Dupargo et al., they have utilized the very high resolution images in the detection of elephants, and they found that this is one of the alternative in identifying the or detecting the number of elephants in a given area. As the Africa is mostly a savanna type of ecosystem, and they have developed the algorithm that is automated algorithm using the deep learning techniques, and they have implemented in Kenya, and later they have validated the results also by selecting the another area, that is Ado Elephant National Park in South Africa. They have found the reliable results in utilizing the high resolution images in count of or census of the elephants. And we at NRSC also have the several projects mostly on the biodiversity characterization at landscape level, and recently we are conducting the study of the biodiversity characterization at community level using the multi-sensor high resolution data. And as a lot of literature is also available on the endemic species as well as again also on the new species, we are making use of the published literature and also the field records in preparing a geospatial database on the occurrence of endemic as well as the endangered species. So here we have shown two maps showing the distribution of the endemic animal species and the endemic plant species. And once we have the georeferenced data of like both latitude and longitude, we can see the changes which are happening in near real time, and also we can able to link it with the anthropogenically induced changes like forest fires or deforestation, and also the earlier survey efforts that and the present condition of the vegetation and habitat. So this type of databases are useful in going for a long-term conservation. And then one more important aspect of biodiversity conservation is to study the invasion of the alien species. The CBD identified that the first threat to the biodiversity is the habitat destruction. The second worst threat is the invasion by alien species. And one of the top 100 invasive alien species is the Prosopagiliflora, and also we have like Lantana chimera, Chromolina odorata. Like that, there are several invasive species which have occupied the native habitats in India and causing a damage to the biodiversity. And recently, we have done one study for the Kutch Biosphere Reserve in Gujarat. There we have mapped the extent of the Prosopagiliflora from 1977 to the recent period. So what the results clearly shows that the Prosopis was invaded more than 100 years back here, and by utilizing this historical imageries and also the recent satellite data, we could able to identify the areas of persistence like the old Prosopis, new Prosopis, and also the colonization. So once if you see this map, it is clear that the light green areas are the areas already got invaded by Prosopis juliflora in 1975, and then light blue, after that dark blue, yellow, and red. So it here clearly shows that it is a coalescence, it is opposite to the habitat fragmentation. So here, whatever the patches which were earlier isolated by the Prosopis are now coming nearer to each other and now making a larger colonies because of the aggressiveness of or the aggressive colonization and the impact by the Prosopis. Then towards the GIS, we have a different kinds of the species distribution model techniques. or ecological niche models that helps us in identifying the suitable habitats for a given species. So actually, these models identify the suitable environmental conditions for the species, not like exactly the species distribution for a given area. Towards this, we need to have the field records from the area of interest. Then you have to integrate this information in the GIS domain and use the appropriate ecological niche model like the random forest model or maximum entropy model to map the probability of a species which is present in a given biogeographic zone or the region. Here, this niche model is taking care of the random locations, it means presence on locations of the species. Then we have the 19 bioclimatic variables which are available in open access from WorldClim. Then soil type data is available from the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. And topographical data sets are available from the different remote sensing data sets like SRTM, ASTER, and the CARTODEM. So this type of data, in addition to them, that we can make use of the vegetation type data, land cover data to go for a better to identify a suitable habitats of the given species. And now, as this decade was identified for the ecosystem restoration, this kind of models will help us in identifying a suitable habitats for the endangered species and also for the narrow endemic species. And this is the map, shows the biological richness distribution in the country. It is a decade-long project conducted with the partnership of more than 40 institutions in the country. The experts with the expertise in the plant taxonomy and the ecology helped us in identifying the species richness level, ecosystem uniqueness, and the economical importance of the species. And we have integrated the information of remote sensing mainly in the form of the vegetation types, terrain complexity, and the disturbance index. And finally, we have modeled the biological richness of the country. And this was one of the major projects as part of the landscape level biodiversity characterization. And this map clearly identifies that the very high biological richness areas mostly in the central and southern Western Ghats, eastern Himalayas, and the parts of Odisha as well as the Madhya Pradesh. This data is useful not only for for identifying the high biological areas, and also useful in selecting a suitable areas to demarcate or notify a new national parks as well as the wildlife sanctuaries. The other work we did at NRSC is that in identifying the intact forest landscapes by utilizing the more than 8-decadal forest cover change information and also the spatial information of roads, agriculture, plantations, and various other anthropogenic factors like the fire disturbances, we could able to identify the areas of the intact forest. Here we applied like a buffer of like 1 kilometer to eliminate the anthropogenically induced disturbances. So it will remove all the edge forests and all the isolated forests which are small and which are very near to the fire disturbance or near to the roads or near to the agricultural fields. So finally, by applying the 1 kilometer buffer from the disturbance sources, it has yielded only the 237 landscapes as intact. And these are distributed in mostly like in Kerala and Western Himalayas and as well as the Eastern Himalayas. There is again some patch of Sundarbans mangrove is also there, which was not shown any kind of negative habitat change towards the Bangladesh part of India. So finally, this is also one of the unique input in identifying the intact forests, and that will help us in identifying or discovering a new species of plants as well as the animals. Finally, here I would like to conclude with that the current directions and challenges are that the remote sensing is not a pure discipline. It is an interface between the engineering, geography, ecology, and various other disciplines. Currently, the focus is towards a generation of new indicators of the biodiversity and the metrics that should deal with species habitat indices, species status, and ecosystem restoration. And by integration of in situ and remote sensing observations, by open access and by free data sets, helpful in developing a near real-time indicators for biodiversity conservation. And as of now, from satellites to UAVs, it means from space to near ground, we have the data at high spatial and high spectral resolutions. And specifically, the UAVs have the capability to provide a detailed information of the landscape. Now, the future of the geospatial technology involves the integration of the artificial intelligence and also the deep learning techniques. Then the monitoring through the remote sensing data and long-term field surveys could have improved the model-based evaluations of the biodiversity change. Now we need a better analytical tools for calculating, visualizing, and interpreting the essential biodiversity variables. Because the essential biodiversity variables are the indicators which provides the information on monitoring and measurement of the change in the biodiversity. And as the technology is growing rapidly in the field of geospatial technology, it can able to provide the important data sets necessary for research as well as for the conservation. Now, as this is a cross-disciplinary field of research and the conservation, now we need to have the collaborative research and collaborative efforts in fulfilling all the conservation goals as well as the sustainable development goals to minimize the damage to the biodiversity and also to improve the status of the biodiversity in the country as well as for the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you, sir.